Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're digging into some fascinating source material that completely, and I mean completely, reframes how we think about education. Instead of just treating learning as this mundane, everyday school requirement, we're actually going to explore the biological and psychological mechanics behind it. Imagine your brain as a literal supercomputer. Well, today, we're finally reading the user manual.
Right off the bat, let's dive into this wild statistic from our sources. Get this, 50% of the material you just heard in a class is completely forgotten within the following 30 minutes. And yes, that's even if you took notes. This right here is exactly why passive listening is basically a recipe for academic disaster. I mean, if you just sit there and let the information wash over you, half of it literally evaporates before you've even walked to your next class. So yeah, we definitely need a better strategy.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The science of learning. 2. Factors influencing your success. 3. How human memory works. 4. The power learning framework. And finally, 5. Mastering academic assignments.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the science of learning.
Okay, so when we look at how learning theory has actually evolved over time, it essentially breaks down into three main camps. First up, we've got behaviorism. This was championed by guys like Pavlov and Skinner, and it views learning as a permanent behavior change driven by experience and reinforcement. Think of a teacher giving out extra credit for completed homework, right? Then we shift over to cognitive theory, led by Piaget, where learning is all about internal mental processes, basically how we build accurate models of the world inside our heads. And finally, there's Vygotsky's socio-constructivism, which argues that learning is incredibly social. It happens through interaction and language, which, by the way, is exactly why a good study group is an absolute game changer.
Let's actually zoom in on that cognitive piece for a second, specifically this concept of a schema. A schema is basically your brain's internal filing cabinet. Let's say a child has a schema for a dog, 4 legs, furry, barks. When they see a new breed of dog, they just slide that info right into the existing file. That process is called assimilation. But what happens if they see a wolf? Well, at first they might try to assimilate it and just call it a dog, but once they learn that a wolf is wild and definitely not a pet, they have to adjust their thinking. They either drastically change their existing file or they create a brand new one. That active process of adjusting your mindset to fit new information, that's called accommodation.
And according to Piaget, this entire chronological journey of cognitive development follows some very distinct stages. We all start out at the sensory-motor stage as infants, learning purely through touch and sight. Over time, we move through the pre-operational and concrete stages, which is where we develop language and basic logic. But the absolute peak is the formal operational stage, which kicks in around age 12. This is the sweet spot where complex problem-solving, abstract thinking, and testing hypotheses actually become possible. And frankly, this is the cognitive hardware you're bringing into your university classes right now.
Moving right along to part 2, factors influencing your success.
Look, we have to recognize that learning isn't just some abstract mental exercise. It's highly physical and environmental. Our sources make this crystal clear. Skipping meals or pulling an all-nighter to cram actively reduces your brain capacity. You absolutely need a balanced diet and adequate sleep just to function at baseline. On top of that, your environment plays a massive role. Trying to study in a super noisy house, that directly impairs your cognitive function. On the flip side, having a strong supportive peer group acts as a huge academic multiplier, letting you share notes and really master concepts together.
But hey, your psychological state matters just as much as your physical one. Confidence is absolutely key here. Taking a minute to apply a personal SWOT analysis, evaluating your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats can literally transform a crippling academic weakness into a completely manageable strategic challenge. And take a look at this concept of will. Willingness here is broken down into 3 W's: will, work, wait. You have to have the willpower to achieve your goals, put in the actual hard work, and then have the patience to wait for the results to compound.
All right, part 3, how human memory works.
Our sources use this absolutely perfect analogy for this. Human memory functions exactly like a computer's hard drive. It runs in 3 very strict phases. Phase 1 is encoding, which is where raw information from your environment gets transformed into a format your brain can actually make sense of. Phase 2 is storage, which is just maintaining that data over time. And Phase 3 is retrieval, accessing that stored info exactly when you need it, like sitting down for a high-stakes exam. The catch? If any single one of these phases glitches out, the learning simply doesn't stick.
Now, to successfully move information from your short-term memory over to your long-term memory, we actually rely incredibly heavily on imagination. Sure, reproductive imagination is great, that's just playing back a memory in your mind like a movie scene, but constructive imagination,
That is the real VIP skill you want to develop. This is your ability to take past experiences and use them to solve brand new, practical, scientific problems. It's not just passively recalling facts, it's actively applying them to complex situations.
Which brings us nicely to part 4, the Power Learning Framework. So this is the POWER framework. Prepare, organize, work, evaluate, and rethink. It all starts way before you even open a textbook, preparing your physical space and setting a solid goal. Next, you organize your notes into outlines or mind maps. But listen, the most crucial step here is the work. This demands active engagement. You cannot just passively highlight a textbook and expect to become an expert. You have to do the practice problems, run the experiments, and really wrestle with the material. After that, you evaluate your understanding by self-testing. And finally, you rethink and tweak your strategies for the next round. And within that framework, you can start deploying some seriously advanced strategies. You've got the global method, which is trying to learn the whole material in one big chunk, or the partial method, where you divide it up. But the absolute gold standard, that's the progressive partial method. It's cumulative. You study Unit 1, then you study Unit 1 plus 2, then 1, 2, and 3 altogether. When you combine this with a concept called overlearning, which literally just means continuing to practice even after you think you've nailed it, you completely eliminate the need for last-minute cramming and build deep, long-term mastery.
And finally, part 5, mastering academic assignments.
Okay, let's circle back to that wild 50% forgetting curve we talked about at the very beginning. Because it drops off so fast, your note-taking strategy is absolutely critical. And obviously, you have to actually show up to class to take those notes. In fact, our sources point out that missing just 25% of your classes can literally result in dismissal from a course. But when you are there, actively reviewing your shorthand notes within 24 hours is the only way to flatten that forgetting curve. If you wait a week to look at them again, you are essentially trying to learn the entire lecture from scratch.
When it's time to actually sit down and write those academic assignments, you really need to understand this vital distinction. Summarizing is when you capture the broad, overarching meaning of an entire text in a super condensed way, without adding any new ideas. Paraphrasing, on the other hand, is zooming in on a specific section and rewriting it completely in your own words, usually keeping it around the same length as the original text. Mixing these two up, or just not knowing how to summarize effectively, is exactly how students end up with disorganized, confusing answers on their final exams.
And honestly, here is the main reason getting paraphrasing right is so important. Plagiarism. Look, plagiarism isn't always intentional mustache-twirling cheating. Very often, it's just accidental patch writing. Accidentally mixing a few copied phrases in with your own words because you lost track of your citations. But regardless of your intent, it is a massive breach of academic integrity. Our sources are very clear that this can result in 0 marks, suspension, or even getting totally dismissed from your institution. So always double-check your citations.
So as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with something to really think about. Are you just cramming to survive your next exam? Or are you actively building the mental frameworks for lifelong success? You've got the manual now. You understand the cognitive science of how your brain operates, the critical importance of your study environment, and the literal mechanics of human memory. I highly encourage you to take that power framework we talked about and start applying it today. Take active, conscious control of your learning. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.